My name is Vera Santori. I'm 42 years old. And this is the story of how my loyalty, my career, and my team were shoved into a literal basement, and how I made sure the people who did it would never recover. The moment I stepped off the elevator that Monday morning, I knew something was wrong. Normally, the East Wing hummed with life. Keyboards clattering, monitors glowing, bursts of laughter from my team's inside jokes. But today? Silence. The kind of silence that wraps itself around you. Heavy and deliberate. I walked quickly down the corridor toward our workspace. The space we'd earned through years of breaking records, beating deadlines, and delivering the impossible. Empty. Every desk cleared. No monitors, no papers, not even the potted plants we'd all pitched in to buy last Christmas. It was like we'd never been there. Like we'd been erased. Finola. I called out, expecting to hear our lead developer's sarcastic reply from somewhere behind a monitor. Nothing. Then I spotted Loxley from accounting passing by with his coffee. Hey, what happened to my team? I asked. He froze. His expression changed into something between pity and discomfort. You should check the basement, he said, then hurried away without looking back. The basement? We didn't have workspace in the basement. The only time I'd ever been down there was to sign off on an equipment delivery years ago. Still, my feet carried me to the elevator, each floor passing with a sinking in my chest. When the doors opened, the familiar polished office vibe vanished. Down here, the air was damp, thick with the smell of mildew and old paper. I weaved past storage crates and dusty maintenance rooms until I saw it. A flimsy printed sign taped to a door. Engineering Team B. Pushed it open. And there they were. My 7 brilliant engineers, jammed into a space between exposed pipes and concrete walls. Folding tables served as desks. Monitors wobbled on uneven surfaces. An extension cord tangled across the floor like a snake. A slow drip from the ceiling plinked into a metal bucket beside Finola's chair. What the hell happened? I demanded. Finola looked up at me, her eyes bright with humiliation. While you were gone, Dear came down with movers. Said we needed to relocate immediately to make room for the new specialist. We had 30 minutes to pack. I blinked. Specialist? What specialist? Ren, our youngest developer, muttered. Some productivity guy. Dear says he's going to revolutionize the department. My hands curled into fists. Without another word, I turned on my heel and headed back upstairs. Our old office, bright, spacious, perfectly located between the testing lab and the design team, was now occupied by one man. Young, slick, arranging framed certificates on my desk while Dear, our department head of 5 months, stood beside him like an eager puppy. Oh, Vera, there you are. Dear beamed like he just caught me sneaking into my own house. Meet Bastian, our new productivity transformation specialist. Increased output 300% at his last 3 companies. He needs the right environment to implement his vision. Your team will manage just fine downstairs until next quarter's budget review. Bastian didn't even look up. He just kept placing his awards on the shelf, awards I'd bet good money no one had ever fact-checked. I forced a tight smile and walked away without a word. Back in the basement, my team stared at me, waiting for an explanation for reassurance. Vega, our hardware guru who'd been here longer than I had, shook his head. 32 years with this company, he muttered. And this is how they treat us. I looked at each of them, Finola, Run, Vega, Kyrie, Indra, Dax, and Noor. People who had given this company everything. People I had handpicked, not just for their skills but for their grit under pressure. And I smiled, calm and deliberate. Pack your bags, I said. They blinked in confusion. Not just for here. Everything. Quietly. Keep it between us. Trust me. They didn't understand. Not yet. But they would. Ren's eyebrows shot up first, then Dax's. Vega leaned back, folding his arms over his chest like a man deciding whether to trust a storm or board up the windows. Finola didn't move at all. She just stared at me, the drip from the pipe ticking like a metronome beside her. Pack for what? She asked, voice flat as sheet metal. For dignity, I said. For the day we walk out of here and never look back. Silence. Then Kyrie let out a half-laugh that sounded more like a cough. You're serious. Dead serious. I took in the small, unnatural space, those folding tables wobbling under monitors we'd scraped budgets to afford, the extension cord snaking across the concrete like a hazard report begging to be written. Start quietly archiving everything we've built. Document our systems with such clarity that a stranger could run them. Comment the code like you're writing love letters to future engineers. Make our knowledge bases bulletproof. Encrypt what's sensitive. Save what's ours. And if you have personal items here, mugs, photos, awards, take them home one at a time. No fuss. No panic. Just be ready. Noor glanced at the ceiling pipe, then back at me, her eyes softening. How long do we have? Not long. But enough. I didn't tell them that I'd known this was coming from the first day. Dear said, fresh perspectives, while casually forgetting to learn the names of the people who carried this company on their backs. I hadn't guessed the basement detail, but I understood the Arkmen like Dear hired Charm to fix what competence already solved. Vera, Vega said, and there was 32 years in how he said my name, 32 years of never once being late and only taking sick days after heart monitors insisted. Are you looking for new jobs? I'm preparing new futures, I said. Plural on purpose. Ren's eyes filled so fast she blinked furiously to clear them before anyone noticed. She failed, we all noticed. Noor reached a hand across the narrow aisle and squeezed her wrist. Dax stared at his screen like it might give him permission to hope. We didn't talk for a while after that. The hum of the building was different down here. A lower sound like being inside the chest of a sleeping creature that might wake up and roll over. I sat on the edge of a crate, opened my laptop, and began the same process I'd used a decade ago when a desert storm tore apart a field hospital I was supplying on a shoestring. List, triage, stabilize, fortify. People always thought I left humanitarian work because I burned out. The truth is I left because I didn't. I was good at it, too good. And I didn't want to die believing that the best use of my life was patching holes no one in power would fix. So I took the job here where budgets lived in spreadsheets and disasters wore crisp suits, and I turned my experience into architecture. Resilient systems, redundant paths, people whose hands you could put your faith in. My first year executives called me lucky. My second year they called me essential. My 8th year Dear arrived and called me old school, smiling as if it were a compliment. Okay, Finola said finally, her voice steady again. If we're doing this, let's do it right. I'll set up a private mirror of our internal wiki with the version history backed up off-network. Kyrie, get me a clean test suite snapshot for each critical module. Dax, you and Ren start annotating the pipeline configs like you're teaching a class of very bright toddlers. Noor, translate our integration SOP into plain English, and I mean plain. I met her eyes and nodded. People called her abrasive because she didn't waste syllables. I called her my right hand because she never ever wasted time. The first week in the basement taught us a new vocabulary of humiliation. The bathroom, for instance. Upstairs we had spotless single-stall restrooms with soft lighting and diffusers that smelled like citrus and eucalyptus. Down here we had a cement closet with a shower curtain for a door, and a sign that said, "Flush twice." The Wi-Fi barely reached. When it did, it came with that fraction of a second lag that turns live collaboration into slow torture. Twice we covered equipment with drop cloths while the pipe above us spat a metallic rain. The building manager apologized in the resigned tone of a man told to choose between the creative team's new lounge and a basic dehumidifier. On Wednesday, Dear sent an all-hands email about embracing the new methodology, with a link to a 37-slide deck featuring Bastian's favorite verbs: disrupt, unlock, gamify, synergize. I read the whole thing. There wasn't a single sentence about our product, our customers, or the handful of edge cases that had nearly sunk us 2 years ago, and that we'd quietly solved without fanfare and without money. Bastian's name appeared under a photo of a trophy I couldn't source anywhere on the internet. Ren drafted a resignation letter that afternoon, and kept it minimized behind a terminal window. I didn't tell her to close it. I did tell her to wait. Trust the plan, I said, and when she asked, "What plan?" I smiled the way you smile at a door you know is about to open. A night I made calls. Not to recruiters, I never liked that dance, but to people who knew the truth about hard work. A logistics director eyed Fed pallets to during a cholera outbreak, now COO at a mid-sized tech firm. A venture partner who had once hidden in a shipping container with me, while we waited for gunfire to stop. A lawyer named Soren who had given me pro bono advice under a tent with sand in our teeth, and who now billed $1,000 hours in a glass tower across the river. He reviewed our contracts while eating a late dinner and sent me a 2-sentence reply 10 minutes later. No non-compete. No IP assignment beyond work for hire. You're clean. Thank you, I wrote back. He replied with a single word. Always. Thursday morning, Deer stopped by the basement in shirt sleeves like an actor playing approachable boss. He propped himself against the doorframe and looked at us with big eyes, as if we were a flock he'd consider loving if only we bleated in the right key. I know the space isn't ideal, he said, but great teams thrive in adversity. And when you see what Bastian's got cooking. He whistled and pointed finger guns at the ceiling. Boom. Boom. Vega repeated, expressionless. Right, Deer said briskly, missing the tone entirely. We're presenting to the board next week. Not we. Bastian. Future focus. Less maintenance talk. He glanced around the basement like it might crack open and swallow him. Keep pushing. When he left, Kyrie exhaled slowly through her nose, the way she does when a load test comes back with noise instead of signal. Less maintenance talk, she said. As if the airplane keeps itself in the air by vibes. That night I wrote 3 emails I never intended to send. One to myself, copied to a legal archive account, summarizing Deer's less maintenance directive. One to HR, asking politely on record for an accommodation for the basement bathroom for our employees who might need privacy. One to facilities, documenting the second pipe leak and our makeshift mitigation. Facts. No adjectives. My anger went into the file names where no one would ever see it. This is how lose your engineers.pdf. Gamify gravity text. Remember this basement you negotiate at docs. By the time the second week ended, our mirror wiki was better than the original. Kyrie's testing protocols read like a masterpiece of paranoia. Dax had labeled a particularly complicated CI step, the cursed staircase, and then explained it with such clarity that I almost cried reading it. Noor's translation of our integration process made me wonder how our salespeople had ever survived without it. Run stopped clicking back to her resignation letter as often. Then Friday came with a sudden sharp pivot. The CEO's office asked me to present our team's accomplishments at the upcoming board meeting. The email was formal, dry. Kindly prepare a brief overview of Team B's last 4 quarters. My team buzzed with a high that smelled like redemption. Finola made a joke about wearing her good boots. Vega asked if he should shave. I didn't share their confidence. I've learned to suspect gifts that arrive wrapped in calendar invites. Still, I prepared. I spent the weekend turning a decade of quiet heroics into 14 slides. Friday we'd fixed a critical bug while a client demo was running. Tuesday we'd migrated a legacy queue with 0 downtime. 3 Octobers ago we'd built a disaster recovery path in 36 hours using duct tape and prayers and a database trick that Kyrie later turned into a standard. I wrote it all like a story with a spine. Not to brag, but to record truth before someone beautiful lied. Monday morning I dressed like I used to dress for hostile donor meetings in war zones. Neat, respectful, unafraid. I carried a printed copy of our slides because I do not trust conference room Wi-Fi even in buildings with rooftop herb gardens. At the stairwell up to the executive floor, Deer appeared like a magician stepping into his own smoke. He blocked the landing with a smile that wasn't a smile. Change of plans, he said, rolling the phrase on his tongue like an apology. The board wants innovation, big picture stuff. Past performance isn't the vibe. Bastian will present. Elaine, I said, meaning the CEO. I spoke with her, he said smoothly. She agrees. He didn't know that lying to me about whether he had spoken to another woman would always land like a slap, not because I believed him, but because it told me exactly what he thought of my memory. I let his words pass without catching them. Understood, I said, and turned back toward the basement. Run looked up as I walked in, hope evaporating visibly from her face. They pulled you. They pulled me, I said. But we keep working. Pack quietly. That afternoon, whispers reached us through the grapevine that runs under every corporation like plumbing. Bastian's presentation had gone badly. The board had asked technical questions that didn't have answers in his slides. Someone had used the words case study and vaporware in the same sentence. Deer's voice was heard rising behind a closed door. When the door opened, he came down to the basement with a smile so forced I could hear it crack. Good news, he said. We're considering moving you back upstairs to the East Wing. The East Wing wasn't our old space. It was a compromise dressed as charity. I didn't blink. Thank you for recognizing our value, I said, and my team looked at me like I'd swallowed a stone. Run, I later learned, went home that night and tore up her resignation letter. 2 days later, I invited an old friend to tour the facility. It wasn't unusual. Companies love parading outsiders past glass walls. My friend's name was Talia Wei. We'd met in a shipping hub where a corrupt border agent held the medicine we needed until the bribe we couldn't pay. I watched Talia stand very still in front of him until silence grew heavy. Then I watched him outweigh his own fear and let the medicine pass. She'd since become the CTO of Grayscale Solutions, a company that made the kind of tools we needed when we refused to pretend. Grayscale didn't hire profits, they hired adults. As we walked toward the executive floor, Deer rounded the corner with Bastion at his side and a clutch of visitors behind them. Vera, Deer said too warmly, like a host spotting a famous guest he didn't invite. Perfect timing. Come meet the Grayscale Solutions team. They're very interested in Bastion's methodology. I introduced Talia. Deer introduced Bastion. Bastion introduced his trophy again. He gave his speech charts, the backstory he'd invented, a case study that, in my memory, had unfolded precisely opposite to the way he told it. Talia listened with polite attention, her head tilted at an angle I recognized from 100 tense logistics conversations. Fascinating, she said when he finished. You've implemented this successfully at multiple companies? Absolutely, Bastion said. Northwest Technologies saw a 300% productivity increase in a quarter. Strange, Talia said, her voice mild. I sit on their advisory board. We never recorded such gains. We did record a series of delays tied to a methodology transition. She turned the slightest degree toward me without taking her eyes off him. I must be misremembering. Bastion's smile held. Deer's didn't. He fumbled the clicker, jumped a slide, and landed us on a chart where the axis labels were missing. The Grayscale visitors exchanged the kind of fleeting looks people share when they don't want to be seen exchanging looks. Talia glanced at the ceiling sprinkler as if measuring flow rate. Vera, Deer said too brightly, why don't you show them the basement? The team is very scrappy down there. Another time, Talia said. I'm here for something else. She looked at me directly. So, about Monday. Monday, Deer repeated. Yes, I said gently. About Monday. We left them standing in the hallway, Deer's mouth parting around a question he was finally clever enough not to ask in public. In the elevator down, Talia and I stood so close our shoulders touched. We'd locked too many doors together to need words for the moment. You have contracts? She asked. Reviewed, I said. Clean. Salary. Double, I said because I'd already asked for it. Office. Windows, I said because I'd already insisted. She nodded once. The elevator doors opened on the basement. My team looked up and saw a woman with the aura of a solution, the opposite of a promise. They stood without being asked. Team, I said, meet Talia. Monday. Vega asked, cautious and hopeful all at once. Monday, I said. The cheer that rose up in that dim room was quiet enough to be dignified and loud enough to rattle the bucket beside Finola's chair. Ren laughed and cried in the same breath and didn't bother hiding either. Dax closed his eyes for a second like a man who has been standing for hours and finally finds a chair. Why us? Kyrie asked Talia softly when the noise settled. Why not hire new? Because you built something real, Talia said simply. And because people who thrive in basements build cathedrals when you give them light. That night I walked the perimeter of the building alone, the way I do when I need to feel where the edges are. Through the glass I could see Bastion's reflection bending over my old desk, arranging a new certificate, chasing a camera somewhere in his mind. I remembered a clinic in a heat wave where we rationed saline with a Sharpie and a stopwatch. We had no certificates there. Only work that had to be done and people who did it or died trying. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote out the final steps of the plan by hand. It wasn't vindictive. I don't have the energy for vendettas. It was meticulous. It was a letter to my future self. When the time comes, keep the room calm. Tell the truth and only the truth. Let the numbers do the shouting. Give them a way forward and a way out. Then choose neither. Choose us. I slept through my alarm for the first time in years and laughed when I realized why. For the first time in months, my body believed me when I told it we were safe. I made coffee, tied my hair back, and left the house while the sky still had that particular blue only early risers know. On the walk to the train, I whispered a thank you to no one and to everyone: field medics, cafeteria workers, software testers, to every person who had ever done maintenance while someone else rehearsed a revolution. In the basement, the bucket had been emptied. The sign on the bathroom still said "flush twice." We worked until the hour leaned toward lunch, then I stood and said, "There's one more thing." 7 faces lifted like flowers toward light. "Tomorrow the board meets at 9, I said. "We weren't invited." "We will be. I need each of you to print the packet I shared and seal it in an envelope. When I give the signal, you'll hand them out in this order. You'll know the moment." "What's in the packet?" Ren asked. "Truth," I said. "With footnotes. I don't believe in omens, but sometimes the universe answers in small, funny ways." As I finished speaking, the pipe above us gave one last stubborn drip and fell silent. The room felt a degree lighter, as if some private weather had changed. I took a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The air smelled for once like only air. By the time morning arrived, I was running on equal parts adrenaline and precision. This wasn't a day for improvisation. Everything had to land exactly where it needed to, at the exact moment it needed to happen. I arrived at the basement earlier than usual, coffee in one hand, a slim black portfolio tucked under my arm. The team came in one by one the way we always did, not together, not in a pack. That was part of our unspoken rhythm. You can tell the health of a group by how they enter a room. We'd learned to blend in, to appear ordinary, even when we were building something extraordinary. Each person had their envelope waiting on their desk, just as I'd promised. Finola ran her fingers along the edge of hers like she could feel the weight of the day inside. Vega didn't even look at his. Just slid it into his backpack with the quiet decisiveness of someone who's handled classified documents before. Run peeked at hers, lips pressing together as if she wanted to ask a question but knew better. "Remember," I said, my voice low, "this is not a confrontation. We are not there to argue. We are there to illuminate. Shine a flashlight in the Roach's kitchen," Dax muttered without looking up. I smiled faintly. "Exactly." At 8:30, I led the way up from the basement. We took the freight elevator instead of the main one, less conspicuous, and frankly, I didn't want to stand next to any of the executives making small talk about golf before the meeting. Outside the boardroom, we waited. Through the thick wooden doors, muffled voices drifted. The low hum of people who thought the decisions they were making were the only decisions that mattered. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight in a way I hadn't felt since the early days in war zones. Right before negotiations with men holding rifles and power in equal measure. At 8:55 on the dot, the CEO's assistant appeared. "Vera? The CEO would like your team to join." The boardroom was all glass, polished wood, and strategic art pieces that looked expensive enough to be conversation starters but bland enough not to offend. Even our CEO sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. To her right, the board chair flipped through a packet of papers. Deer was halfway down the table, his posture unnaturally stiff, Bastion beside him wearing a carefully neutral expression that still somehow reeked of unease. We took our seats opposite Deer and Bastion. I could feel my team's tension radiating through the air. They were prepared, but the stakes were written all over their faces. "Let's begin," Even said. "Deer, you were presenting your departmental restructuring plan." Deer stood, cleared his throat, and launched into a series of slides that looked like they'd been designed to impress someone who'd never actually managed a team. Colorful charts with soaring arrows, buzzwords like paradigm shift and disruptive momentum, all layered over stock photos of smiling, ambiguously diverse people shaking hands. I watched the board members' eyes, some politely attentive, some already flicking down to their notes. And of course, Deer was saying, "Our star hire Bastion has spearheaded these productivity improvements. We're already projecting a 200% increase in departmental output by year's end." One of the older board members leaned forward. "And the existing engineering team? How are they integrating with this methodology?" Deer hesitated. "There's been some resistance to change. Understandable with any transformation. We've addressed this by reallocating resources and temporarily relocating them to the basement, Even said evenly, not looking up from her notes. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Yes, Dear said after a beat. A temporary measure, of course. Renovations are. Renovations that began after you learned they were resigning, she interrupted again. A flicker of panic crossed his face. The timing. Thea, she said. No, not Thea, my name. Vera. Your perspective. I stood, feeling the eyes of every person in the room on me. With your permission, I'd like to distribute some information to provide context. I nodded toward my team. One by one, in the exact order I'd instructed, they slid their envelopes across the table to the board members. Inside was a meticulous breakdown of the department's last 5 years, deliverables, timelines, revenue impact. It was indisputable proof that 78% of last year's successful projects had come from our so-called basement team. The final pages showed projections under Deere's current strategy. A sharp, undeniable decline in productivity and deliverables. The murmurs started almost immediately. Pages flipped. A pen tapped sharply against the table. These figures are troubling, one board member said, looking directly at Deere. They're pulled from the company's own systems, I said. No embellishment, no omissions. Just the numbers. Another board member, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes to match, turned to Bastian. Your last 3 companies, you list remarkable productivity increases on your resume. Can you explain the corresponding declines documented here, after your first quarter? Bastian's jaw tightened. That's taken out of context. It's all public record, I said, cutting him off smoothly, including the wrongful termination lawsuit from Northwest Technologies and the class action from Verdant Systems during your tenure. Silence. Bastian sat back slowly. Deere's face drained of color. This isn't about personal grievances, I continued. It's about whether the company values proven, sustainable results, or empty promises wrapped in flashy presentations. It's about whether we invest in substance or style. I could feel the shift in the room. We'd gone from being the invisible, discarded team in the basement to the center of the conversation, and not because we'd begged for recognition, but because we'd handed them the truth and let them choke on it. What came next would decide everything. The board chair's voice broke the silence first. Vera, you've made your point clearly. But I have to ask, if you and your team have already resigned, why bring this forward now? I let the question hang for a moment, scanning the table. Some of them looked genuinely curious. Others already understood the subtext. This was about leverage, about who controlled the narrative. Because, I said evenly, I care about what happens to this company after we're gone. And because I believe there's still a way for both sides to benefit from what comes next. That was the signal. Noor slid the second set of packets onto the table, each one crisp and bound. This, I continued, is an alternative proposal. Instead of my team disappearing entirely, we split. Half join our new venture under Talia Way at Grayscale Solutions. The other half stays here, under new leadership, and continues our work, with direct collaboration between the two groups on critical projects. A few board members leaned forward, even watched me closely but didn't interrupt. This arrangement would keep institutional knowledge in-house, maintain continuity for clients, and frankly, repair some of the internal damage that's been done. I let that last phrase settle like dust on old furniture. It's unprecedented in our industry, but it's also practical, and it ensures that neither company has full leverage over us. That means stability. That means performance without fear. Talia, sitting 3 seats down from Even, finally spoke. We've reviewed the plan from our side. We're ready to commit resources to make it work. Shared infrastructure, joint IP where applicable, quarterly innovation sprints. The upside is significant. The steel gray-haired board member glanced at Even. And who leads the remaining team here? Someone who values long-term results over short-term optics, I said before Deere could open his mouth. That decision is yours to make, but my team will not stay under current management. Deere finally found his voice. This is absurd. You're trying to undermine me in front of the board. You undermined yourself, I said sharply. The moment you moved 78% of your department's productivity into a basement, so you could give my desk to a man with a history of failed implementations. A low murmur rippled through the room. The board chair raised a hand. I think we've heard enough for now. Vera, thank you. Would you and your team wait outside while we confer? We gathered our things. As I walked past Deer, he hissed under his breath. You've been planning this for months. I didn't even look at him. You planned it the moment you put us in that basement. I just made sure everyone saw what that choice cost you. Out in the hall, the tension that had been holding my team upright finally eased, replaced by an electric mix of nerves and adrenaline. Vega let out a low whistle. Run gripped the strap of her bag like it was the only thing keeping her from shaking. Whatever happens in there, I told them, we've already won. We told the truth. And we didn't need to shout to make them hear it. We didn't have to wait long. Barely 30 minutes later, Evan's assistant opened the door and motioned for me to come back in, just me. My team's faces were a mix of curiosity and concern, but I gave them a small nod before stepping inside. The board members had shifted positions. Some had taken off their jackets. Others leaned back like they'd just finished a difficult but satisfying negotiation. Deer was nowhere to be seen. Bastian sat alone at the far end of the table, staring at a spot on the wall as if willing it to open and swallow him whole. Even gestured toward the chair beside her. Have a seat, Vera. I did, keeping my posture relaxed, even as my mind catalogued every tiny detail. The missing players, the slightly disheveled papers, the faint smirk on the steel gray-haired board member's face. The board has reached a decision, Evan said. Effective immediately, Deer and Mr. Bastian are no longer with the company. The words landed like the satisfying click of a lock turning. She continued, we're prepared to move forward with your proposal. The split team arrangement, direct collaboration with Grayscale, and, she glanced down at her notes, you as director of the in-house division. Halftime I almost corrected automatically, but she beat me to it. We understand you'll be dividing your time equally between us and Grayscale. We're in agreement. Contracts will be ready by tomorrow. It took effort not to let my relief show too much. Thank you, I said simply. This is more than a thank you, the steel gray-haired board member cut in. This is a chance to turn this department into the model others study. Don't waste it. I met her gaze. I won't. When I stepped back into the hall, 7 pairs of eyes locked on me instantly. I didn't make them wait. They're gone, I said. Deer and Bastian. Effective immediately. Our proposal is approved. We start Monday. The reaction was quiet at first, stunned, as if they were waiting for a punchline. Then Ren let out a sharp laugh. Finola grinned like she'd been holding it in for weeks, and Vega just closed his eyes and shook his head slowly, like a man finally setting down a load he'd carried too long. We didn't cheer. We didn't dance. We just stood there together in that sterile hallway, breathing the same air for the first time without the weight of someone else's agenda pressing down on us. As we headed back toward the basement to gather our things, Ren fell into step beside me. So, this was the plan all along? Not just to leave, but to change the whole damn system. Not exactly, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. The original plan was to make sure my team landed somewhere safe. But once I saw how broken it really was, I realized we could do more than save ourselves. We could make it so no one else gets shoved into a basement again. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Worth it. Monday came faster than any of us expected. That first morning of the transition, we didn't head to the basement. We didn't even go near the east wing. Instead, we met in the lobby, all of us carrying boxes, bags, and the kind of energy you only feel when you're walking away from something that tried to break you. Half the team would be taking the elevator up to the newly assigned floor for our in-house division. The other half would head across town to Grayscale's offices with Talia. I stood in the middle of them, clipboard in hand, running through the checklist we'd agreed on. Security badges surrendered, equipment accounted for, personal items removed. No loose ends. Finola, Kyrie, and Vega would stay here with me for the first half of my week, building the in-house branch into something respectable again. Run, Dax, and Noor would join Talia full-time, integrating our processes into Grayscale systems. It wasn't just logistics, it was a living insurance policy. 2 homes, 2 revenue streams, and no one company holding our futures in their clenched fists. When the split was final, I walked the Grayscale group to the lobby doors. Talia was waiting at the curb, leaning casually against a sleek black sedan, the kind of arrival that told everyone on the street she didn't just belong, she led. "You ready?" she asked them. Ren nodded so hard I thought her ponytail might snap. Noor offered a small, determined smile. Dax just said, "Always." They piled into the car, and Talia looked at me over the roof before getting in. "We'll make you proud." "You already have," I said. Back upstairs, I stepped into our new office space. It wasn't perfect, a little too open plan for my taste, the carpet a questionable shade of beige, but it was bright, it had windows, and the only sound overhead was the hum of quiet air vents, not the drip of a leaking pipe. "Feels weird," Vega said, setting his box down. "Like we got promoted and evacuated at the same time." "That's exactly what happened," I replied. "Now let's make sure we earn the promoted part every single day." The next weeks blurred into a rhythm of rebuilding. I spent mornings with the in-house team, re-establishing workflows, rewriting policies so no one could pull another basement stunt without board-level approval. Afternoons, I'd take the train across town to Grayscale, walking into an entirely different energy. A startup hum, agile boards covered in sticky notes, engineers working in clusters like old friends. Every Friday, both halves of the team met virtually for what we jokingly called Basement Alumni Hour. We'd swap updates, share cross-company project notes, and laugh at how surreal it all still felt. But beneath the jokes, there was a current of something deeper. The unspoken understanding that we'd turned a survival story into a blueprint. One evening after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I found myself alone in the new office, the city lights glowing against the glass. I thought about the first time I'd stepped off that elevator and seen our desk stripped bare. The shock. The humiliation. And now, months later, that moment felt less like a wound and more like a pivot point. The basement hadn't been the end. It had been the start of something bigger. And I wasn't done yet. By the third month, the ripples we'd started began turning into waves. It started small. An industry blog ran a short piece about the unusual cooperative model between our company and Grayscale. They called it a promising experiment in intercompany resource sharing. No names, no deep details, just a hint of curiosity. But in the tech world, curiosity spreads faster than truth. A week later, a bigger outlet picked it up. This time, they used my name and Talia's, along with a side-by-side photo of us from a joint presentation we'd given at a small conference. The headline read, "From Basement to Boardroom, How Two Companies Are Rewriting the Rules of Collaboration." At first, I braced for backlash, whispers from competitors, pushback from internal politics. Instead, something else happened. People started reaching out. Some were engineers trapped in toxic departments, asking if we were hiring. Others were executives from unrelated industries, wanting to know how to adapt the model. A few were quiet, almost ashamed confessions from managers who realized they'd undervalued their own teams. Inside our company, attitudes shifted too. Departments that had once treated engineering team B like a black box now invited us into early project discussions. My team, both halves, had seats at tables we'd never been allowed near before. Even the board chair sent a brief but telling email. "You've exceeded our expectations. Keep going." Grayscale was thriving as well. Ren sent me a photo of her new workspace. A corner desk by a wide window, sunlight pouring across her keyboard. "This still feels like a dream," her message read. I saved it. Our weekly Basement Alumni Hour became more than just updates. It became a space for innovation. We'd trade insights from each side, compare system metrics, identify gaps before they became problems. More than once, a solution we devised together ended up boosting performance in both companies by double digits. The industry began to notice the numbers. Clients did too. Contracts started coming in faster, bigger. The collaboration wasn't just holding. It was outperforming expectations. One afternoon, after a particularly strong joint client pitch, Talia pulled me aside. "You know this is going to become the standard, right?" she said. "5 years from now, other companies will pretend they invented it." I smiled. "Let them. As long as the people doing the real work get treated like they matter, I don't care whose name is on it." That night, I stayed late at the office again, looking out over the city. Somewhere down there, Deer was probably pacing in some smaller, dimmer office, still wondering how it had all slipped away. Bastian was likely spinning his next pitch, hoping no one dug too deep into his history. And me? I wasn't thinking about them anymore. The revenge had already happened. Now I was thinking about what came next, how to make sure the basement stayed empty forever. It hit us on a Thursday morning, the kind of day that had started so quietly I should have known it wouldn't last. I was halfway through reviewing a cross-company security audit when my phone buzzed, Talia's name flashing across the screen. She didn't waste time on greetings. Vera, I just got off a call with our legal department. Your side's procurement team submitted a proposal to bring a third-party contractor in for a project that's already on our joint roadmap. No one from your division looped us in. If they sign off, it'll cut Grayscale out entirely. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a minor oversight. It was the kind of move that could erode months of trust in seconds. Do you know who initiated it? I asked. Someone in upper management, she said, and I could hear the restraint in her voice. Not one of your people. But it's written up like it's originating from your division. That's a problem. I told her I'd handle it. Within an hour, I was standing in Evan's office, the procurement file on her desk between us. I don't know who approved this, I said. But it undermines the collaborative agreement we've built. If it goes forward, it sends the message that the arrangement is optional. It's not. Even steepled her fingers. You have to understand, Vera, not everyone is comfortable with the idea of a shared resource model. Some still believe we should be self-sufficient. Self-sufficient doesn't mean self-sabotaging, I said. We agreed this partnership was a strategic advantage. If someone here is trying to quietly undo it, that's not dissent, that's breach of trust. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're implying intentional sabotage. I'm stating that trust has to be defended, I replied. If the board approved this arrangement, then we need to make sure internal politics don't gut it behind closed doors. We agreed to put the procurement request on hold, pending a joint review. But I knew a delay wasn't enough. This was a test, not just of the alliance but of whether the two halves of my team could withstand pressure from above without turning on each other. That Friday at Basement Alumni Hour, I laid it out plainly. Someone here tried to bypass Grayscale on a shared project. It didn't come from any of you, but the perception matters as much as the reality. If anyone ever feels pressured to make a move that undermines the other side, you bring it to me or Talia immediately. No exceptions. Ren's face hardened on the screen. We've all been in basements. No one here is putting anyone back in one. A quiet murmur of agreement followed, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease, but not entirely. The incident had been contained, yes, but I could feel the eyes on us now waiting for cracks to form. Later that night, as I closed up my laptop, I realized something. The real challenge wasn't building the alliance. It was protecting it from people who couldn't stand the idea of a system they couldn't control. And those people, they weren't going away. I didn't have to dig long to find the source. 2 days after the procurement stunt, a junior analyst from finance, a kid barely a year out of school, sent me a confidential email. He'd overheard a conversation in the executive lounge. One of the senior VPs had been bragging about testing the Grayscale arrangement to see how much autonomy I'd really been given. The name he gave me wasn't a surprise. Mitchell Caro. He'd been circling my division since the day the board approved my director role. Always with that oily smile and just curious questions about our metrics. The type who played golf with decision makers and thought that meant he understood operational strategy. I scheduled a meeting with him under the pretext of aligning on future resourcing. He showed up 15 minutes late, carrying a coffee like it was a trophy, settling into the conference chair across from me with the easy arrogance of someone who'd never been caught. Vera, he said, I hear you wanted to talk about the procurement proposal. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. I slid the printed request across the table. No misunderstanding. You initiated this without consulting either my division or Grayscale, for a project already designated as joint. He gave a lazy shrug. We were exploring options. Contingencies. Contingencies, I repeated. That's an interesting word for undermining an approved strategic partnership. His smile tightened just slightly. You have to understand, not everyone's sold on this experiment of yours. It's unconventional. Makes some people nervous. Good, I said flatly. If they're nervous, it means it's working. But let me be clear, Mitchell. The board approved this collaboration. The metrics back it. The client pipeline backs it. The only thing that doesn't back it is your ego. Color rose in his cheeks. Careful. No, I cut in, my voice low but steady. You be careful. I have a full record of this request, the paper trail tying it to your department, and a timeline that proves you bypassed established protocol. I can put it in front of the board by tomorrow. Or, I let the word hang there just long enough for him to shift in his chair. You can pull the request, issue a written acknowledgement that any joint roadmap changes require sign-off from both companies, and keep your head down. He stared at me for a long moment, weighing how much of his reputation he was willing to gamble. Then he leaned back, forced a thin smile and said, "Fine. You win this round." "It's not a round," I said, standing. "It's the rule." By the next morning, the procurement request was formally withdrawn, replaced with a signed joint statement from both companies reaffirming the partnership. I didn't have to show the board my evidence, but I sent even a short note summarizing the resolution. Her reply came in 2 words. Well handled. That Friday's basement alumni hour had a lighter mood. Ren joked about sending Mitchell a care package with a flashlight, since he clearly likes the dark. Vega asked if we could make it a new tradition to take down 1 corporate saboteur per quarter. I laughed with them, but inside I knew we'd crossed another invisible line. This wasn't just about defending our own structure anymore. It was about showing anyone watching that we weren't just a novelty. We were permanent. And permanence, in a world like ours, was the sweetest form of revenge. 6 months later, I stood in a conference hall in Chicago, facing an audience of 200 industry leaders. A massive banner behind me read, "Innovation in Collaboration, Case Studies from the Field." They'd invited me to speak not because our arrangement with Grayscale was unusual, though it was, but because it was working, better than anyone expected. Our metrics were up in every category: delivery speed, client satisfaction, retention. Both companies had seen stock bumps. And most importantly, not a single engineer from either side had been quietly relocated to a metaphorical basement since the partnership began. I told our story in careful beats without naming names. I spoke about trust, about how it's built in inches and destroyed in seconds. I spoke about resilience, about what happens when you take a team used to working under pressure and give them air, light, and the resources they need. When I finished, the applause rolled like a wave across the room. It wasn't just polite, it was the kind of applause that said, "We felt that." Later, over coffee, a woman from a competing firm approached me. "We've been thinking about trying something similar," she said. "But honestly, we're afraid of the politics." I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. Politics are always there, I told her. The trick is making sure they can't touch the work. Protect the people doing it, and the politics become background noise. Back at our headquarters the following week, I took the elevator, the main one, to the top floor. Eva's office door was open, and she waved me in without looking up from her laptop. "I saw your talk," she said. "Well done." "Thanks," I replied. She closed her laptop and looked at me. "You've built something sustainable here. The board's impressed." "I'm impressed. And frankly, I'm glad we didn't lose you." There was a time those words might have felt like vindication. Now they just felt like confirmation of what we already knew. They needed us as much as we needed the leverage to walk away if that ever changed. That Friday's basement alumni hour was less about work and more about life. Photos from Ren's hiking trip. A story from Vega about teaching his granddaughter to solder. Finola's dry one-liners about the latest software update. We laughed, we planned, and when the call ended, I just sat for a moment in the quiet, feeling the weight of what we'd built. The revenge had happened months ago, in boardrooms and hallways, and one very satisfying procurement takedown. But what we had now, that was beyond revenge. It was a future. I thought back to that first day, the empty desks, the dust outlines where our monitors used to be, the smell of mildew and defeat in the basement. I remembered the way my team looked at me then, waiting for an answer I couldn't give them yet. And I thought about now, 2 thriving divisions, equal footing. No fear of being shoved aside for someone with a shinier resume and a thinner skill set. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about crushing the people who wronged you. It's about building something so strong, so undeniable, that they could never do it to anyone else again. We'd done that, and I'd make damn sure it stayed that way.